Please, sir, I meant no harm.
Stealing is stealing, girl.
I was hungry.
There's ways, not this.
The snowy night and that single dollar. In the far northern mountains, there was a valley so remote that even sunlight arrived more like pale fog than real warmth. People called it Black Hollow. Old stories said the stars hesitated to shine here at night, and the moon frequently hid behind clouds as though ashamed to be seen. High above the tree line, where forest gave way to nothing but rock, ice, and wind, stood a single tiny cabin. Inside lived Dara. No one knew Dara's exact age. Some guessed mid-40s, others closer to 60. His face was permanently weathered by sun, frost, and wood smoke. His beard and hair had long ago turned the same iron-gray white. His eyes were sharp, too sharp, like they could read thoughts you hadn't even admitted to yourself. He was not an ordinary mountain man. He was the last hunter in these parts who still used a traditional bow and handmade arrows instead of a rifle. The reason was simple. One cartridge cost more than a month's worth of food, and Dara never had savings. That night the snow was falling hard, almost horizontally. Wind screamed through cracks in the cabin walls. Inside the fireplace, only 2 small logs still glowed weakly, already dying. Dara reached under his old sheepskin coat and pulled out a small cloth pouch. Inside were exactly 3 things. Single worn $1 bill, given to him perhaps 10 years earlier by a lost tourist. He had never spent it. A tiny silver ring, the only thing his mother had pressed into his hand before she died. A folded piece of paper with some English writing on it. He had no idea what it said. He looked at the dollar bill for a long moment and muttered, "You haven't been useful for a long time, but just existing keeps my pride alive." Suddenly, there was a sound outside. Not a howl or a branch breaking, a soft, tired, deliberate knocking. Dara listened. This was no animal. Animals don't knock like that. This was a human hand, very weak. He stood, picked up his walking staff, which was really an old spear whose iron tip had broken off years ago, and opened the door. A white wall of snow and wind hit him. Right in front of the doorway stood a woman. She was completely wrapped in a black hooded cloak. Only her eyes were visible, and those eyes were so deep they seemed to contain the entire night. Her whole body trembled violently. No bag, no staff, no extra blanket, nothing to protect her from storm. Dara asked, "Who are you?" The woman did not answer. Instead, she slowly extended one shaking hand. In her palm was a small cloth bundle. Dara stepped aside and motioned her inside. She entered very carefully, as though she did not quite believe any place could be safe. The moment the door closed behind her, Dara threw his last piece of wood onto the fire and said, "Sit close. You're freezing." She sat near the hearth, but kept her face hidden beneath the hood. Then she opened the small cloth. Inside was a little wooden box. When she lifted the lid, a faint golden gleam escaped. There were 3 items. An old gold coin, maybe 100 years old or more. A small sapphire ring. A folded piece of paper with a hand-drawn map. Dara studied the objects, then looked at her and asked, "What is all this? And why did you bring it here?" For the first time, the woman spoke. Her voice was very soft, almost fragile, but perfectly clear. "I came to ask you for one thing only." Dara raised an eyebrow. "Say it." She took a slow breath and said, "I need only $1. Silence. Dara stared at her for several heartbeats. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the same faded $1 bill he had carried for a decade. He held it out to her. "Here." She took the note, looked at it for a second, then slipped it somewhere beneath her cloak. Next, she pushed the little wooden box toward him. Gold coin, sapphire ring, and map all together. "Take these," she said. Dara gave a short, dry laugh. "I gave you $1. You're giving me gold and a jewel? Is this a joke?"
Under the same sky, the murmurs did not stop even after the chest was closed. Margaret stood motionless, the weight of the moment pressing on her chest. Half the land, in her name. The words echoed as if spoken again and again by the wind itself. She looked at Taza Grey Hawk, really looked at him this time. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly, her voice barely steady. "I did," he replied. There was no pride in his tone, only certainty. Because it is right. That unsettled her more than arrogance ever could. Leaving the crowd behind, they departed before sunset. Margaret expected instructions, rules, control. Instead, Taza mounted his horse and waited. "You may ride beside me," he said, gesturing calmly. "Or behind. Your choice." Choice. She swallowed and mounted the horse beside him. The land opened wide around them. Red earth, low brush, distant mountains cutting the horizon. The sky felt vast, almost overwhelming, as if it could swallow her fears whole. "You live on the reservation?" she asked cautiously. "Yes," Taza answered. "Near it." They rode past the clustered dwellings she had imagined, heading instead toward the foothills. "Is this where you live?" she asked. "Yes," he said. Then added, "If you wish to live here." Her heart skipped. "If I wish." He nodded once. "I will not cage you, Margaret." The way he spoke her name, carefully, respectfully, made her chest tighten. His home. The house was modest but solid, built with skill and patience. Not grand, but strong. Inside, everything was prepared. A private room. A bed with clean linens. A chest for her belongings. "You will sleep here," Taza said. "I will sleep in the outer room." She turned sharply. "But we are married." "Marriage without consent is not marriage," he replied evenly. No man had ever said that to her. "You owe me nothing," he continued. "Not your body. Not your obedience. Only honesty." Something cracked open inside her, something painful and frightening. "Why?" she asked. Taza looked toward the doorway, where the mountains burned gold in the fading light. "Because my people have had enough taken from them," he said quietly. "I will not be another man who takes." The first night. Night settled softly. Margaret lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling. Outside, she could hear the low crackle of a fire. He was awake. She knew it. There was no knock. No footsteps at her door. Only silence and respect. She rose at last and opened the door. Taza sat by the fire, carving a piece of wood with slow, practiced movements. He looked up without surprise. "You cannot sleep," he said. "No," she admitted. "Sit," he offered. She did, the warmth of the fire easing the tightness in her chest. "Are you afraid of me?" he asked directly. Margaret hesitated. "I was taught to be. And now? I'm uncertain." A faint smile touched his lips. "That is closer to the truth." A promise spoken aloud. "There is something you should know," Taza said after a moment. "If you decide to leave, tomorrow, or any day, I will not stop you." She looked up sharply. "Even if I leave you?" Even then. They were not words of romance. They were words of dignity. For the first time in her life, Margaret felt like more than a solution to someone else's problem. Eyes upon her. Morning brought attention. Women watched her, quietly, carefully. Some curious. Some wary. Some openly disapproving. She felt it acutely. She was not merely an outsider. She was a white woman who now held Apache land. An older woman approached her at last. "Are you treated well?" she asked plainly. Margaret thought carefully before answering. "I am safe." The woman nodded once. "That is enough, for now." The first threat. That evening, a government official arrived on horseback, his expression tight. "This arrangement will cause trouble," he said coldly. "A white woman holding Apache land. That will not sit well." Taza's face remained calm, but his eyes hardened. "The land belongs to itself." He replied, "We are only its guardians." Margaret felt it then, clear and undeniable. This marriage was not just between two people. It was a challenge. And challenges invite enemies. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, Margaret realized something else as well. Whatever she had been sent here to be, she was no longer powerless. The weight of names. Margaret did not sleep easily that night. The words of the government official echoed in her mind like a warning bell. This arrangement will cause trouble. She had crossed an ocean of expectations to arrive here, and now she stood at the center of something far larger than herself. Land, power, identity, and a marriage that neither side of the world fully understood. Morning among strangers. At dawn, the land awakened gently. Margaret stepped outside, drawn by the cool air and the pale pink sky stretching endlessly above the mountains. The earth smelled different here, dry, honest, unashamed of itself. She wrapped her shawl tighter as footsteps approached. Taza stopped several paces away, giving her space as always. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "A little," she answered truthfully. "Enough to think." He nodded. Thinking can be heavier than labor. She surprised herself by smiling, learning the unspoken rules. As the morning passed, Margaret began to notice things she had missed before. No one spoke loudly around Taza. Not out of fear, but respect. Decisions were not announced, they were discussed. Elders gathered beneath the shade of a large mesquite tree, speaking in low tones. Taza listened more than he spoke. She watched him carefully. He was not a ruler. He was a bridge. A young woman approached Margaret cautiously, offering her a bowl of water. "Thank you," Margaret said, unsure if the gesture would be understood. The woman hesitated, then nodded and smiled faintly. It was small, but it mattered, the name she carried. Later that afternoon, an elder requested Margaret's presence. She entered the shaded circle with a racing heart. The elder's eyes were sharp, assessing. "You carry many names," he said slowly. "Daughter, wife, white woman, owner of land." Margaret felt the weight of each word. "I did not ask for the land," she said carefully, "but I will not misuse it." The elder studied her for a long moment. "Land remembers how it is treated," he sighed. He said, "So do people." She nodded, understanding more than the words themselves conveyed. A secret from the past. That evening, as the sun sank low, Margaret finally spoke the truth she had carried like a stone in a chest. "I was not chosen because I was wanted," she said softly to Taza. "I was sent because I was unwanted." He looked at her, listening. "My uncle needed me gone. I was inconvenient." Taza's jaw tightened, not in anger, but restraint. "You were used," he said. "Yes." He met her gaze steadily. "Here, you will decide who you are." For the first time, Margaret believed it might be possible. Trouble takes shape. The sound of approaching horses cut through the calm. 2 men arrived, settlers from the nearby town. Their eyes moved from Taza to Margaret, lingering too long. "So this is her," one of them muttered. "The girl who owns Apache land." Margaret felt a chill. "This land is not for sale," Taza said firmly. One of the men smirked. "Everything has a price." Taza stepped forward, calm, immovable. "Not this." The men left, but not without promise in their eyes. Promise of return. Promise of conflict. A choice begins. That night, Margaret stood outside again, staring at the stars scattered like secrets across the sky. She had been sent here as a solution, a transaction, a mistake. But now she understood something clearly. She could leave. Taza had given her that freedom. Yet for the first time in her life, staying felt like a choice, not a sentence. And choices, she was learning, were powerful things.
Their lower branches heavy with snow. The ground beneath them was dark and needle-covered, easier to walk on, harder to leave clear footprints. Dara led them deeper in, weaving between trunks, trying to break line of sight. After perhaps 15 minutes, he found what he was looking for. A small overhang of rock with a shallow cave beneath it, barely deep enough for 2 people to sit side by side. A thick curtain of snow-laden spruce branches hung in front of it, almost hiding the opening completely. He motioned her inside. She slipped in without hesitation. He followed, crouching low, then carefully arranged the branches behind them so the entrance looked untouched from outside. They sat in near total darkness. Only the faintest blue light filtered through the needles. Neither spoke for a long time. Eventually, Dara whispered, "How many are there?" She took so long to answer, he thought she might not. Then, barely audible, "One. One man." "No." He waited. She added even more quietly, "One that was once more than one." Dara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. He had heard fragments of stories, half-drunk hunters mumbling about the echo people or the ones who walk after. Old tales of miners trapped in a collapse 100 years ago, or soldiers lost in a blizzard, or entire families wiped out by avalanche who never quite left the mountain. He had always dismissed them as grief dressed up as folklore. Now he wasn't so sure. The tapping sound returned. Closer. This time it came from almost directly above them, on the rock shelf that formed the roof of their little shelter. Top, 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 top. Slow. Then quicker. Then slow again, like someone trying to decide. Dara shifted his grip on the bow. An arrow was already knocked. The woman suddenly reached out and laid her hand lightly on his forearm. He froze. Her fingers were ice cold, even through his sleeve. Don't, she breathed. Why not? Because it wants you to see it. Dara stared at the dark shape. Papers, promises, and the cost of staying. The sheriff's car arrived just afternoon. Its tires crunched against the gravel driveway, loud enough to make Lena's heart drop into her stomach. She was hanging laundry when she saw the badge glint in the sunlight. Ethan was repairing a saddle nearby. The moment he saw the car, his expression hardened, not with fear, but with readiness. Sheriff Miles stepped out, tipping his hat. "Afternoon, Ethan." "Miles," Ethan replied calmly. "What brings you this far out?" Miles glanced past him, toward Lena. "We need to talk." Lena's hands went numb. They sat at the kitchen table. The air felt tight, heavy with things unsaid. Miles laid a folder on the table. A man named Caleb Warren filed a complaint. Lena flinched. "He claims Lena here is under a signed employment agreement," the sheriff continued. "Says she left owing him wages and breach of contract." "That's a lie," Lena said, voice shaking. "He never paid me." Miles nodded slowly. "Maybe, but his paperwork looks convincing." Ethan leaned forward. "What does this mean?" "It means," Miles said carefully, "that legally she may be required to return, or at least appear in court." Lena's breath caught. "I can't go back there." Ethan's jaw tightened. "She's not going." Miles raised a hand. "Easy. I'm just delivering notice. Court hearing in 2 weeks." 2 weeks. The number echoed like a death sentence. After the sheriff left, silence filled the house. "This is my fault," Lena whispered. "I should leave now, before I cause you more trouble." Ethan stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. "No, you don't owe me this," she said, tears spilling over. "You gave me food, safety. I gave you a choice," he interrupted, "and you chose to stay." She looked at him. "For now." He stared at her, something raw in his eyes. "Is that all it is to you?" Her voice broke. "I am scared." "So am I," he admitted. That stopped her. He took a breath. "Caleb's counting on fear. And law. And the idea that you're alone." "I'm alone," she said. "No," Ethan said firmly. "You're here." That night, the ranch felt smaller, walls closing in with every thought of courtrooms and contracts. Lena Pexiape Inui. She didn't want to, but she'd learned the hard way that staying too long made leaving hurt worse. She was tying the last strap when Ethan appeared in the doorway. "You running?" The day Love stood in court. The courthouse smelled of old wood and dust, like a place where stories came to be judged, not understood. Lena sat beside Ethan on a hard wooden bench, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She wore a simple blue dress. No uedi, no muck-up, just honesty and fear wrapped together. Ethan sat straight, shoulders squared, silent strength radiating from him. Across the room, Caleb leaned against a pillar, confident, smug. A lawyer stood beside him, well-dressed, well-paid. Caleb's eyes flicked to Lena's hand. There was a ring now. His smile faded. The judge entered. "This court is now in session." Caleb's lawyer spoke first, smooth, rehearsed. "Your Honor, my client provided employment and housing to Miss Lena. She breached contract, leaving unpaid dues and causing financial harm." Caleb nodded solemnly, playing the victim well. When it was Lena's turn, her legs felt weak as she stood. She spoke anyway. "He never paid me," she said, voice trembling but clear. "He kept my documents. He controlled where I went. I worked and starved." Her words echoed softly. Caleb scoffed. "She's lying." Ethan stood then. "Permission to speak," he said. The judge nodded. "My wife." Ethan said deliberately, is not property. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. She came to my ranch hungry. I offered her work. Later, I offered her my name. Not to hide her, but to protect her. Caleb's lawyer snapped. Convenient timing. Ethan didn't flinch. Truth doesn't change because it arrives late. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Warren, do you deny withholding wages? Caleb hesitated just a second too long. That's when the door opened. A woman stepped inside. Thin, nervous, determined. I work for him too, she said loudly. He did the same to me. Gasps filled the room. Then another man stood. And me. The courtroom shifted. Caleb's confidence cracked. The judge banged the gavel. Order. Within minutes, the story unraveled. Complaints, unpaid wages, intimidation. The judge's voice was final. Case dismissed. Further investigation ordered into Mr. Warren's practices. Caleb turned toward Lena, rage burning in his eyes. This isn't over, he hissed. Ethan stepped between them instantly. It is, he said coldly. Outside the courthouse, Lena's knees buckled. Ethan caught her. You're free, he whispered. She pressed her face into his chest, sobbing. Not from fear now, but release. I was so scared, she said. I know, he replied, holding her tighter. You don't have to be anymore. They married quietly that evening. No guests, no music, just vows spoken under a wide sky. Lena wore a simple white dress, plain but perfect. Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, hand steady. I promise, he said, to never cage you, to stand beside you. Always. I promise, she said, tears shining. To stay, not because I have nowhere else to go, but because I choose you. They kissed, not rushed, not desperate. Certain. That night, peace settled over the ranch. For the first time in years, Ethan slept without dreams of loss. For the first time in her life, Lena slept without fear. But peace, like silence, never lasts forever. Far away, Caleb sat in a dim bar, phone in hand. They ruined me, he growled. I want what's mine. A voice on the other end replied calmly. Then take something from him. Caleb smiled. The ranch, that chose love. The fire came in the middle of the night. Not loud at first, just the sharp smell of smoke creeping into the ranch house like a warning whispered too late. Lena woke coughing. Ethan, she whispered urgently, shaking him. Smoke. He was on his feet instantly. Outside, orange light flickered against the windows. The barn. Stay here, he ordered, grabbing his boots. No, Lena said, already pulling on her coat. We go together. They burst outside. Flames climbed the side of the barn, licking the dry wood hungrily. One of the horses screamed in terror. Ethan swore under his breath. Someone did this. Lena knew who. Caleb, she whispered. Ethan ran toward the barn, heat blistering the air. He kicked the door open, smoke pouring out like a living thing. Inside, chaos. He worked fast, cutting ropes, slapping the horses forward, coughing as smoke burned his lungs. Outside, Lena pulled each animal clear, tears streaming down her face, not from smoke alone. Then she heard it. A crack. The roof groaned. Ethan, she screamed. Inside, a beam collapsed, slamming into his shoulder and knocking him to the ground. Pain exploded through him. For a second, the world went dark. Lena didn't think. She ran straight into the fire. Heat scorched her skin. Smoke filled her lungs. She spotted Ethan through the haze, struggling to stand. I've got you, she cried, wrapping her arm around him. He shook his head. Get out. Not without you. Together, stumbling, choking, they made it out just as the roof collapsed behind them in a roar of sparks. They fell onto the dirt, gasping. Sirens sounded in the distance. Neighbors had seen the flames. Ethan turned his head weakly. You should have stayed out. Lena laughed through tears. You promised not to cage me. That includes fear. He smiled faintly. Caleb was arrested before sunrise. Gasoline. Witnesses. Motive. This time, there was no running. As he was led away in handcuffs, he locked eyes with Lena. You think you won? He spat. She stepped forward, voice calm, steady. I didn't win. I survived. He looked away. Weeks passed. The barn was damaged, but not destroyed. Neighbors came, helped rebuild, brought food, wood, laughter. Life returned, stronger than before. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Ethan stood beside Lena, watching the land glow gold. Almost lost everything, he said quietly. She slipped her hand into his. No, you almost learned how much you had. He looked at her, really looked at her. The girl who once stole eggs to survive now stood tall, unafraid. What if I'd never gone to the coop that morning, he asked. She smiled softly. Then I would have starved somewhere else, and you would have stayed lonely. Silence settled, gentle, full. Funny, he said, how fate works. She rested her head on his shoulder. Maybe it wasn't fate. What was it? A choice, she said, made twice. Months later, laughter echoed across the ranch. A small child ran through the grass. Lena watched from the porch, hand resting on her stomach. Ethan joined her, eyes full. Still glad you stole those eggs? He teased. She smiled. Best crime of my life. He kissed her forehead as the sun set over the land that had witnessed hunger, fear, fire, and finally, love. Not the kind that rescues once, but the kind that stays forever.